The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the stagecoach as it rattled across the dusty Arizona territory. Inside, Willa Harper pressed a handkerchief to her perspiring forehead, her blue traveling dress clinging uncomfortably to her slender frame. 3 days into the journey, and the Boston school teacher was beginning to wonder if her decision to come west had been hasty. "First time to Silver Creek, ma'am?" The elderly gentleman seated across from her smiled kindly, his weathered face creased with wrinkles that spoke of decades under the western sun. "Yes," Willa nodded, tucking a stray strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. "I'm to be the new school teacher." "Brave girl," the man's wife commented, fanning herself vigorously. "Not many Eastern ladies would venture out here alone." Not many had reason to start over completely, Willa thought, but didn't say. The weight of the past 6 months, her parents' graves, the auction of her childhood home, the returned engagement ring, sat heavy on her chest. At 23, Willa Harper had lost everything familiar, but she refused to lose herself to despair. The stagecoach driver's voice filtered through the window. "Passing through Rattlesnake Canyon now, folks. Keep your eyes peeled. There's been reports of the Harker gang operating in these parts." A tense silence fell over the passengers. The elderly couple exchanged worried glances while a traveling salesman clutched his sample case tighter. "Harker gang?" Willa asked quietly. "Jake Harker," the salesman replied, his voice dropping to a whisper as if the name itself might conjure the man. "Meanest outlaw this side of the Mississippi. They say he's killed 12 men, maybe more." Now, the elderly gentleman patted Willa's hand reassuringly. "No need to frighten the young lady. The sheriff's men patrol these roads regular. We'll be just fine." But his words had barely faded when the first gunshot rang out. Everything happened with horrifying speed. The stagecoach lurched violently as the driver tried to outrun their pursuers. More shots cracked through the air. Willa's heart hammered against her ribs as she gripped the leather seat. "Get down!" the elderly man shouted, pushing his wife to the floor. Through the window, Willa glimpsed masked riders closing in, dust billowing behind their galloping horses. The coach pitched sideways as a wheel caught on a rock. The impact threw Willa against the door, which burst open under her weight. The world spun as she tumbled out, striking the hard ground with enough force to drive the air from her lungs. Pain blossomed in her side, sharp, white-hot. Looking down, she saw crimson spreading across her blue dress. A bullet had found her. Instinct took over. While the bandits surrounded the stagecoach, Willa dragged herself behind a cluster of boulders. The sounds that followed would haunt her forever. More gunshots, screams cut terribly short, rough laughter. She pressed her hand against the wound, fighting the darkness edging her vision. When silence finally fell, she risked a glance around the rocks. The stagecoach stood abandoned, its door hanging open. The bodies of her fellow passengers lay motionless in the dust. No one had survived. The realization struck her with as much force as the bullet. She was alone, wounded, in a desolate canyon with murderers still nearby. If she stayed, they would find her. If she moved, they might see her. But staying meant certain death. Gritting her teeth against the pain, Willa began to crawl away from the road, toward a distant line of scrubby trees. Each movement sent fire through her side, but she pressed on, fear giving her strength she didn't know she possessed. Night fell, mercifully hiding her from view. The temperature dropped rapidly, the desert heat giving way to bone-chilling cold. Willa shivered, tearing strips from her petticoat to bind her wound. The bleeding had slowed, but the pain remained constant, a burning companion that kept unconsciousness at bay. She thought of her parents, how her father had always praised her tenacity, how her mother had taught her to face hardship with dignity. They wouldn't want her to surrender now. With renewed determination, Willa struggled to her feet and began walking east, using the stars as her guide. Dawn broke across the desert, revealing a landscape both beautiful and terrifying in its vastness. Willa's lips were cracked, her throat parched. The makeshift bandage at her side was stiff with dried blood. Each step required more effort than the last, but she pushed on, knowing that to stop was to die. By midday, the sun had become an enemy, beating down without mercy. Her vision swam, the horizon rippling like water. Was that a mirage? Trees in the distance? Perhaps a stream? Hope briefly flared, then dimmed as reality asserted itself. There was nothing but sand, rock, and scrub for miles. The second night was worse. Fever took hold, painting her dreams with nightmarish images. James's face, handsome, cruel, telling her he couldn't marry a penniless schoolteacher. Her mother's final rattling breath, the stagecoach passenger's lifeless eyes. On the third day, Willa could no longer remember why she was walking. Her legs moved mechanically, one foot before the other. The wound in her side had begun to smell faintly sweet, infection setting in. Still she walked. When she fell, she crawled. When she could crawl no more, she inched forward on her belly like a wounded animal. It was there, sprawled on the baked earth, that Ethan Westfield found her. The crack of a rifle shot echoed across Ethan Westfield's land, startling a flock of ravens into flight. He reined in his horse, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. Another shot would mean trouble, but the desert fell silent again, save for the soft whistle of wind through sagebrush. At 30, Ethan had developed the cautious instincts necessary for survival in the Arizona territory. 10 years of ranching had taught him to read the land and its warnings. Something felt wrong today, a prickling at the back of his neck that experience had taught him never to ignore. He nudged his stallion forward, changing course to ride the perimeter of his southern property line. The land spread out before him, 15,000 acres of hard-won territory that had become his life's work after his father's death. Westfield Ranch wasn't the largest in the territory, but it was profitable, respected, a testament to Ethan's determination. The sun hung low in the western sky when he spotted something unusual, a splash of blue against the rust-colored earth. At first, he took it for a wildflower, perhaps a patch of desert lupine. But as he drew closer, the shape resolved into something else entirely. A woman lay face down in the dirt, her blue dress torn and filthy, chestnut hair fanned out around her head. She wasn't moving. Ethan was off his horse in an instant, approaching cautiously. Bandits sometimes used bait to lure in unsuspecting travelers. But there was no ambush waiting, just a young woman, half dead from exposure and blood loss. Gently he turned her over, drawing in a sharp breath at the sight of her wound. A bullet had grazed her side, tearing through fabric and flesh. The makeshift bandage was dirty, the skin around it inflamed. She was burning with fever, her breathing shallow and labored. "Miss," Ethan said softly, shaking her shoulder. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of storm clouds. They were glassy with pain and confusion, unable to focus on his face. "Can't breathe," she gasped, her chest heaving with the effort. Ethan acted quickly, easing her into a more comfortable position, supporting her upper body. "You're hunched over too much," he explained, his voice steady and reassuring despite the gravity of her condition. "Let me help. Try to breathe with me, in and out, nice and slow." Their eyes met, and for a moment something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, though they were strangers. She struggled to match her breathing to his, fighting against the pain. "That's it," he encouraged, "just like that. I'm going to get you somewhere safe, but first we need to move you to my horse." "The others," she whispered, "all dead." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. "What others? What happened to you?" But her eyes had already closed, consciousness slipping away once more. Decisions had to be made quickly. The ranch house was an hour's ride, and she needed immediate attention. With careful movements, Ethan lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, fragile as a desert bird. Mounting his horse while holding her was a challenge, but years of ranch work had made Ethan strong. He settled her before him in the saddle, one arm securely around her waist, mindful of her injury. Her head lolled against his chest as he urged the horse homeward at a pace that wouldn't jostle her too severely. "Stay with me," he murmured, feeling her life ebbing with each passing moment. "Just hold on a little longer." The sun was setting as Westfield Ranch came into view, its whitewashed buildings glowing amber in the fading light. Ethan's foreman, Miguel, spotted them approaching and rushed to meet them, alarm evident on his face. "Dios mío, what happened?" "Found her in the south pasture," Ethan replied, carefully dismounting with the woman still in his arms. "Shot. Looks like she's been wandering for days. Get Isabel, quick." Miguel sprinted toward the main house while Ethan carried his burden to the guest room on the ground floor. He'd barely laid her on the bed when Isabel Mendoza burst through the door, her expression shifting from concern to determination when she saw the wounded woman. "Out!" she ordered Ethan, rolling up her sleeves. Fetch water, clean bandages, in my medicine box. Then wait outside. Ethan knew better than to argue with the woman who had managed his household since he was 20. Isabel had been a midwife in her village in Mexico before crossing the border. Her healing skills had saved many on the ranch over the years. He gathered the requested supplies, then paced the hallway outside the guest room, listening to Isabel's murmured prayers in Spanish as she worked. Night had fallen completely by the time the door opened. She lives for now, Isabel said, wiping her hands on her apron. The bullet only grazed her, thanks be to God, but infection has set in. I've cleaned the wound and applied a poultice, but the fever must break or... She left the sentence unfinished, crossing herself. Will she wake? Perhaps. She's young and strong, but Ethan, Isabel's dark eyes met his. Who is she? Where did she come from? I don't know, he admitted. She mentioned others being dead before she passed out. I'm riding to town first thing tomorrow to speak with Sheriff Sullivan. Maybe he's heard reports of trouble. Isabel nodded, then paused, studying him with the knowing look that had unnerved him since boyhood. You'll sit with her tonight? It wasn't really a question. They both knew he would. I'll bring you coffee, she said, patting his arm before heading toward the kitchen. Ethan entered the guest room, taken aback by the transformation. Isabel had removed the filthy dress, bathed their patient, and dressed her in a clean nightgown. Her chestnut hair, washed and combed, spread across the pillow like spilled honey. Without the grime of the desert, her face revealed itself to be delicately featured, though currently flushed with fever. He settled into a chair beside the bed, noting how out of place this refined-looking young woman seemed in his ranch house. Her hands, though blistered and cut from her desert ordeal, showed no calluses from hard labor. Her accent, from the few words she'd spoken, was distinctly Eastern. What had brought her to this remote corner of the Arizona territory and into the path of violence? Throughout the night, Ethan maintained his vigil. When she thrashed in fevered dreams, he held her hands to prevent her reopening the wound. When she cried out names he didn't recognize, mother, father, James, he spoke softly to calm her. And when her breathing became labored, he helped her sit up, supporting her until the spasm passed. Dawn was breaking when Isabel returned, carrying a tray with fresh coffee and bread. You've not slept, she observed, setting down the tray. Ethan shook his head, stretching stiff muscles. Her fever rose twice in the night. I thought we might lose her, but she fought through. Isabel checked their patient, changing the poultice and nodding with cautious approval. The inflammation has not spread. A good sign. Go, eat, and prepare for your ride to town. I will watch her now. Reluctantly, Ethan stood. As he reached the door, Isabel called after him. She spoke in her fever, many things I could not understand, but one name she repeated, Willa. Perhaps that is her name. Willa, Ethan repeated, testing the sound of it. Somehow it suited her. Sheriff Thomas Sullivan's office smelled of stale coffee and gun oil. The lawman looked up from his paperwork as Ethan entered, his weathered face creasing into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Westfield, don't often see you in town unless it's market day. Trouble, Sheriff, Ethan replied, removing his hat. Found a young woman on my land yesterday, shot, half dead from wandering in the desert. Before she passed out, she mentioned others being dead. The sheriff's expression darkened. Sit down, Ethan. I'm afraid I know exactly who you're talking about. For the next 10 minutes, Ethan listened in growing horror as Sullivan detailed the stagecoach robbery 2 days prior. 4 passengers and the driver, all murdered. No survivors reported. Except your young lady, Sullivan concluded, leaning back in his chair. We found the stage yesterday morning, following reports of gunfire. Harker's work, no doubt. His gang's been hitting coaches along that route for months. Harker, Ethan repeated, the name leaving a bitter taste. Jake Harker had been a plague on the territory for 3 years now, always managing to stay one step ahead of the law. We caught 2 of his men in Tucson last week, Sullivan continued, but Harker himself is still out there with at least 4 more. Mean bastards, all of them. The woman, I think her name might be Willa, she needs a doctor. Is Doc Evans in town? Sullivan nodded. I'll send him out to your place this afternoon. And Ethan, he added as Westfield rose to leave, keep an eye out. If Harker realizes he left a witness alive. The implication hung in the air between them. Ethan settled his hat back on his head, jaw set in determination. Let him try to come after her. Awareness returned to Willa slowly, like a ship emerging from dense fog. First came sensation, soft sheets against her skin, a dull throb in her side. Then sound, a woman's soft humming, the distant lowing of cattle. Finally, she opened her eyes to an unfamiliar ceiling of rough-hewn beams. "Ah, she wakes at last," said a voice with a melodious accent. "Gracias a Dios." Willa turned her head to find a Mexican woman in her 50s sitting beside the bed, setting aside embroidery to lean closer. "Where am I?" Willa asked, her voice a dry rasp. "Westfield Ranch," the woman replied, helping Willa sip water from a tin cup. "I am Isabel Mendoza, housekeeper here. Senor Ethan found you 3 days ago, nearly dead in the desert." 3 days. The realization sent a wave of panic through Willa. She tried to sit up, gasping as pain lanced through her side. "No, no," Isabel chided gently, easing her back down. "The doctor says you must rest. The bullet wound was not deep, but infection nearly took you. The fever broke only yesterday." Memories flooded back. The stagecoach, the gunfire, her fellow passengers. Tears sprang to Willa's eyes. "They're all dead," she whispered. "Everyone on the stagecoach. I saw it happen." Isabel crossed herself. "The sheriff told Senor Ethan. A terrible thing. But you are safe now, Miss Willa." "How do you know my name?" "You spoke it in your fever. Is it your name, yes?" "Yes, Willa Harper. I was traveling to Silver Creek to take a position as schoolteacher there." Isabel smiled. "A teacher. Senor Ethan will be pleased. His mother was a teacher before she passed." The door opened then, admitting a tall man with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin. His features were strong rather than handsome. A straight nose, square jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of a summer sky. He stopped short when he saw Willa awake. "Miss Harper," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark blonde hair. "Good to see you with us again." "Mr. Westfield?" Willa guessed. He nodded, stepping further into the room but maintaining a respectful distance from the bed. "Ethan Westfield, how are you feeling?" "Alive," Willa answered honestly. "Thanks to you, I understand." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Isabel did the real work. I just provided transportation." Isabel made a dismissive noise rising from her chair. "He sat with you all through the first night," she informed Willa. "No, I will fetch broth. You must eat to regain strength." With that, she bustled out, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. "The sheriff knows about what happened," Ethan said after a moment. "They found the stagecoach. And the others. I'm sorry." Willa closed her eyes briefly, the faces of her fellow passengers floating before her mind's eye. They never had a chance. It happened so fast. "Sheriff Sullivan will want to take your statement when you're stronger. He believes it was the Harker gang." "Harker," Willa repeated, remembering the name from the salesman's warning. It seemed a lifetime ago. "They were looking for the strong box, I think. But they shot everyone anyway." Ethan's expression hardened. "Harker doesn't leave witnesses. You're lucky you were thrown from the coach." "Lucky," Willa echoed hollowly. She didn't feel lucky. She felt hollowed out, as if the desert had scoured away everything but the most basic elements of her being. Sensing her distress, Ethan changed the subject. "Isabel tells me you're a teacher. Bound for Silver Creek?" "Yes. The school board hired me based on correspondence. They're expecting me, or were." Anxiety gripped her. "They must think I'm dead with the others." "I've sent word to them through Doc Evans. They know you're recovering here." Relief washed through her, followed swiftly by gratitude. "Thank you. You've been so kind, taking in a stranger like this." "Anyone would have done the same," he replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. But in this harsh country, where survival often depended on looking after oneself first. Isabel returned with a tray bearing a steaming bowl. "Enough talking. She must eat, then rest." Ethan nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "I'll leave you to it. Welcome to Westfield Ranch, Miss Harper. You're safe here for as long as you need to stay." As he turned to go, Willa called after him. "Mr. Westfield?" He paused, looking back at her with those startling blue eyes. "Thank you for helping me breathe," she said softly. "When you found me, I couldn't, and you knew just what to do." Something passed between them then, a moment of connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. He inclined his head slightly. "Rest well, Miss Harper." For the first time since waking, Willa felt she might actually be able to. The days of Willa's recovery fell into a gentle rhythm. Mornings brought Isabel with breakfast and fresh bandages. Afternoons were for resting on the small porch outside her room, where she could watch the activities of the ranch unfold in the distance. Evenings often found Ethan joining her for a brief conversation before dinner, his quiet presence strangely comforting. A week after she'd first regained consciousness, Doc Evans declared the wound healing nicely and the danger of infection passed. He was a gruff older man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "You're a fortunate young woman, Miss Harper," he said as he packed away his instruments. "Not many could have survived what you endured." "When will I be strong enough to travel to Silver Creek?" Willa asked, eager to fulfill her commitment despite everything. The doctor exchanged a glance with Isabel. "Not for several weeks yet, I'm afraid. That wound needs time to heal properly. And you've lost a lot of blood. Your body needs rest." Disappointment must have shown on Willa's face, for Isabel patted her hand reassuringly. "Do not worry. Senior Ethan has spoken with the school board. A Mrs. Abernathy, she says your position will wait." This kindness from strangers overwhelmed Willa. Since her parents' death 6 months ago, she had encountered little but coldness and opportunism. Her father's debtors had descended like vultures, forcing the sale of the family home. Friends had drifted away, uncomfortable with her changed circumstances. And James, her fiancé, had proven himself interested only in her family's former position, not in Willa herself. That evening, feeling stronger than she had in days, Willa ventured further than the small porch, walking slowly to the main house's front veranda. The sun was setting, painting the desert landscape in hues of gold, crimson, and deepest purple. She stood transfixed by the beauty of it. "It never gets old," came Ethan's voice from behind her. "No matter how many sunsets I see." Willa turned to find him watching her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "It's magnificent," she agreed. "So different from Boston." "Is that home for you?" It was. The simple past tense contained volumes: loss, change, acceptance. "My parents died last winter. Influenza." "I'm sorry," he said, and she knew he meant it. "My mother passed when I was 10. Fever took her in 3 days." Willa nodded, understanding the particular grief of losing a parent to illness. The helplessness, the desperate bargaining with God, the final surrender. "Your father?" she asked softly. "Died 5 years ago. Heart gave out." Ethan moved to stand beside her at the railing, looking out over his land. "He brought me west when I was 15. Said there were too many memories back in Pennsylvania." The revelation of their shared loss created a bridge between them, spanning the differences in their backgrounds and experiences. "Why teaching?" Ethan asked after a companionable silence. Willa smiled, thinking of her classroom back in Boston. "I've always loved learning and sharing that with children. There's nothing quite like seeing a child's face when understanding dawns. It's like watching a light ignite." "My mother felt the same way," Ethan said, a wistful note entering his voice. "She taught in a one-room schoolhouse in our town. Used to say that molding young minds was the most important work there was." "She sounds like a wonderful woman." She was. He fell silent again, lost in memory. Willa studied his profile in the deepening twilight. There was a solidity to Ethan Westfield, an unwavering steadiness that she found increasingly comforting. He wasn't handsome in the polished, drawing-room way that James had been. Ethan's appeal lay in his quiet strength, his straightforward manner, free from pretense. "Tell me about the ranch," she prompted, genuinely curious. "Have you always been a rancher?" A subtle change came over him, a slight straightening of the shoulders, a spark of pride in his eyes. "Not always. I was studying at university when my father decided to come west. Engineering." He gestured toward the complex system of windmills and water troughs visible in the distance. "Came in handy for developing irrigation." "You gave up your studies to come here?" "Didn't give up anything I truly wanted," he replied simply. "This land, it gets in your blood, becomes part of you." As they talked, Willa began to understand what had shaped this man. The early loss of his mother, the uprooting from his eastern home, the years building something meaningful alongside his father, and finally shouldering the full responsibility of the ranch alone. Each experience had tempered him, like steel in a blacksmith's forge. Isabel eventually appeared to announce dinner, eyeing them both with poorly concealed interest. The meal was served in the ranch house's modest dining room, beef stew, fresh bread, and preserved peaches that Isabel proudly noted came from their own small orchard. It was the first time Willa had dined properly since the stagecoach, and the simple food tasted like a feast. As they ate, Ethan spoke of ranch matters, cattle prices, water concerns, a new breeding program he was implementing. Ordinary topics, but Willa found herself genuinely engaged, asking questions that seemed to please him with their thoughtfulness. Later, as Isabel cleared away the dishes, refusing Willa's offer of help with a firm, "You are still healing," Ethan excused himself briefly. He returned carrying a small wooden box. "Found this when I was in town today," he said, setting it before Willa. "Thought it might help pass the time during your recovery." Inside the box was a chess set, the pieces carved from pale and dark wood with simple but elegant lines. Willa looked up in surprise. "You play?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "My father taught me," said it developed strategic thinking. His eyes met hers with a hint of challenge. "Do you?" "My father taught me as well," Willa replied, matching his smile with one of her own. "Said it was important for a woman to learn to think several moves ahead." "Wise man," Ethan commented, setting up the board between them. "White or black?" For the next hour they played in companionable concentration, each discovering the other to be a worthy opponent. Isabel, passing through with coffee, paused to observe them with evident satisfaction before continuing on her way. When Willa finally captured Ethan's king with a move he hadn't anticipated, his look of surprise gave way to genuine respect. "Well played, Miss Harper." "Thank you, Mr. Westfield," she replied, enjoying the moment of triumph. Then, acting on impulse, she added, "Please, call me Willa." He considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Willa?" he repeated as he had that first day. "Then I'm Ethan." Something shifted between them with this small intimacy, a subtle realignment that neither fully understood, but both felt. Outside, the desert night settled over the ranch, stars emerging in a sky unmarred by city smoke. Inside, two solitary souls found unexpected comfort in each other's company. In her second week at Westfield Ranch, Willa began helping Isabel with small household tasks, eager to repay some of the kindness shown to her. The older woman initially protested, but soon recognized Willa's need to feel useful rather than merely an invalid. They worked together in the kitchen garden one morning, Willa carefully thinning seedlings while Isabel harvested early lettuce. The rhythm of the work soothed Willa, reminding her of summers in her mother's garden back in Boston. "Senor Ethan rides out early today," Isabel commented, seemingly casual but watching Willa from the corner of her eye. "Checking the north pasture fences." "He works very hard," Willa observed, careful to keep her tone neutral. She had become increasingly aware of Isabel's matchmaking inclinations. "Too hard sometimes," the housekeeper agreed. "Always alone with his books and papers at night. A man needs more in his life than cattle and ledgers." Willa changed the subject. "These tomato plants are coming along nicely." Isabel laughed knowingly but allowed the deflection. "See, very good this year. The secret is fish bones buried beneath." Later that afternoon, while Isabel napped, Willa explored the ranch house more thoroughly than she'd yet dared. It was a substantial structure built of adobe and timber, cool despite the desert heat. The front rooms, dining room, sitting room, Ethan's office, were functional but comfortable, furnished with solid pieces that spoke of practicality rather than fashion. A small room off the main hallway caught Willa's attention. The door stood slightly ajar, revealing bookshelves lining the walls. Curious, she slipped inside. It was a library, modest in size but rich in content. Volumes of history, science, and engineering filled one wall, while another held classical literature, poetry, and philosophy. Willa ran her fingers along the spines, surprised by the breadth of subjects. A worn copy of Wordsworth's poems particularly caught her eye. "Find anything interesting?" Willa startled at Ethan's voice, nearly dropping the book she'd just withdrawn. He stood in the doorway, dusty from his ride, but smiling slightly at her discomfiture. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude." "No intrusion. Books are meant to be read." He stepped into the room, gesturing to the volume in her hands. "Wordsworth. Do you enjoy poetry?" "Very much," Willa admitted, "though I wouldn't have expected to find such an extensive library on a cattle ranch." A shadow crossed his face so quickly she almost missed it. "Most people don't," he said quietly. Understanding dawned. You think it makes you seem less of a rancher somehow? To appreciate literature? Ethan moved to the window, looking out at the land that demanded so much of his physical strength and practical knowledge. Out here, a man's judged by what he can do with his hands, not by what books he's read. My father understood that. He kept his love of learning private. And you've done the same, Willa observed. Not a question, but a statement. He turned back to her, his expression both defensive and vulnerable. The men respect me because I can ride, rope, and shoot as well as any of them. Because I understand cattle and water rights and territorial politics. If they knew I read Wordsworth by lamplight, they might see you differently, Willa finished for him. But perhaps not in the way you fear. Ethan's eyebrow raised skeptically. Sensitivity isn't weakness, she continued, thinking of her students back in Boston, how the strongest boys were often those secure enough to show compassion. It takes as much courage to appreciate beauty as it does to face hardship. For a long moment, Ethan simply looked at her as if seeing something new. Then he gestured to the book still in her hands. That was my mother's favorite. She used to read to me from it on summer evenings. The admission clearly cost him something, a piece of himself rarely shared. Willa handled the book with new reverence, understanding it represented not just poetry, but memory, connection, loss. Would you read some? She asked softly. To me? Surprise flickered across his features, followed by hesitation and then, remarkably, acceptance. He took the book from her, opened to a page marked with a faded ribbon, and began to read in a low, steady voice. For oft, when on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills, and dances with the daffodils. The words hung in the air between them, creating a moment of perfect stillness, a shared appreciation of beauty that somehow made the room feel both smaller and vaster simultaneously. Thank you, Willa said when he closed the book, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, carefully returning the volume to its place on the shelf. I should clean up before dinner, he said, the practical rancher reasserting himself. But as he left, he added, feel free to borrow any books that interest you, Willa. She remained in the library long after he'd gone, surrounded by the knowledge and imagination contained in those shelves, wondering at the complexity of the man who had collected them. Sheriff Sullivan arrived the following day to take Willa's official statement about the stagecoach robbery. They sat in Ethan's office, the lawman's weathered face grave as Willa recounted the terrible events. You're certain it was Jake Harker himself? Sullivan asked when she'd finished. I heard one of the men call him Jake, Willa replied, twisting her hands in her lap. And he wore a red bandana, just like the salesman described before. She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Sullivan nodded, making a note in his small book. That matches what we know. And you say there were 5 men total? Yes, 4 besides Harker. That aligns with our intelligence. The sheriff closed his notebook with a sigh. Miss Harper, you should know that you're the only witness who's ever survived one of Harker's robberies. That makes your testimony invaluable, but it also puts you at risk. A cold feeling settled in Willa's stomach. You think he might come after me? It's a possibility we can't ignore. Harker's still at large, though we caught 2 more of his men in Tucson last week. When you're well enough to travel to Silver Creek, I'll arrange an escort. She's welcome to stay here as long as necessary, Ethan interjected from where he stood by the window. The ranch is more defensible than the town boarding house. Sullivan considered this, scratching his gray stubbled chin. Could be for the best, at least until we bring Harker in. Your men are all armed? And good shots, Ethan confirmed grimly. Willa looked between the 2 men, a mixture of fear and gratitude washing through her. I don't want to put anyone in danger because of me. This isn't your doing, Ethan said firmly. Harker made his choice when he attacked that stagecoach. You're not responsible for his actions. The simplicity of his statement, delivered with such conviction, eased something in Willa's chest. Since her parents' deaths, she had shouldered every burden alone, convinced she had no right to expect help. Now, this man she barely knew was offering protection without hesitation, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. After the sheriff departed, promising to increase patrols in the area, Willa retreated to the porch. The conversation had left her shaken, bringing back the horror of that day in vivid detail. She leaned against a post, taking deep breaths of the clean desert air. Isabel found her there sometime later, still lost in thought. Ah, querida, such a troubled face, the housekeeper said, joining her at the railing. The sheriff's visit has upset you. He thinks the man who attacked the stagecoach might come looking for me, Willa explained. I'm putting you all in danger by staying. Isabel made a dismissive sound. This ranch has faced worse than some bandidos. Senor Ethan's men are brave and loyal. And besides, she added with a knowing look, I think he would not let you go so easily now. Heat rose to Willa's cheeks. Mr. Westfield has been very kind, that's all. Kind, yes, but there is more. Isabel's dark eyes were gentle but perceptive. I have known him since he was a boy of 17, when his father first brought him west. Never has he read poetry aloud to anyone since his mother died. Until you. Willa's breath caught. How did you? These old ears still work well, Isabel chuckled, and these old eyes see how he looks at you when he thinks no one notices. He feels responsible for me because he found me, Willa insisted, though something fluttered in her chest at Isabel's words. It's nothing more than that. If you say so, querida. Isabel patted her hand, clearly unconvinced. But I will tell you this. Before you came, the ranch was a place of work only. Now it begins to feel like a home again. That evening at dinner, Willa found herself studying Ethan with new awareness. He was speaking about cattle breeding techniques with his usual practical focus, but now she noticed other things too, the way his hands moved expressively when discussing something that interested him, how his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he almost smiled, the careful way he listened when she spoke. Was Isabel right? Could this self-contained rancher possibly see her as more than just a responsibility? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Willa had sworn off romantic entanglements after James's betrayal, convinced that her heart was better kept locked away. Yet here it was, quickening at the mere possibility of Ethan's interest. Later, as they sat on the porch watching stars appear in the darkening sky, Willa gathered her courage to ask the question that had been forming in her mind since the discovery of the library. Isabel mentioned you were studying engineering before coming west. Do you ever regret not finishing your degree? Ethan was silent for so long that Willa feared she'd overstepped. When he finally answered, his voice was thoughtful rather than defensive. Sometimes, but not in the way you might think. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't regret the ranch or this life, but I do wonder what I might have built, what problems I might have solved with that knowledge. You've built plenty here, Willa observed, gesturing to the ranch spread out before them, and solved more practical problems than most engineers ever face. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. That's a generous way to look at it. It's the truth, she insisted. Most men with university education couldn't survive a month out here, let alone create something so successful. And what about you, he asked, turning the conversation. Any regrets about coming to West? Before everything that happened? Willa considered the question seriously. Not regrets exactly, fears perhaps, that I wasn't prepared for the challenges, that I was running away rather than towards something. She paused, gathering her thoughts. After my parents died, everything in Boston felt hollow. The house wasn't a home anymore, just walls and furniture. My friends weren't really friends, just social connections. Even my fiancé. She stopped, realizing too late what she'd revealed. You were engaged? Ethan asked quietly. Willa nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to the chain around her neck, where she kept half of her engagement ring, cut in two the day James had returned it, a symbolic severing of what had once been whole. James Blackwood, she said, her hand unconsciously moving to the chain around her neck, where she kept half of her engagement ring, cut in two the day James had returned it, a symbolic severing of what had once been whole. My fiancé in Boston. He ended our engagement after my parents died. He was a fool, Ethan said simply. Willa looked away, unable to hide the lingering hurt in her eyes. Perhaps, or perhaps just practical. Not to me, Ethan's voice was firm. My parents married for love, against both their families' wishes. My mother could have had a comfortable life in Philadelphia, but she chose a struggling farmer with dreams instead. They never regretted it, not even in the hardest times. The conviction in his words stirred something in Willa, a hope she had thought extinguished by James's rejection. In Boston's drawing rooms, marriage was discussed in terms of suitable matches, advantageous connections, appropriate backgrounds. Here, beneath the vast Arizona sky, Ethan spoke of love as if it were the only consideration that truly mattered. "And you?" she asked softly. "Have you never thought of marriage?" A shadow passed over his face so quickly she almost missed it. "Once," he said after a moment. "A long time ago." Before Willa could ask more, Isabel appeared at the doorway, announcing that a rider was approaching from town. Ethan was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the gun at his hip. "Stay inside," he instructed both women, his voice shifting to a tone of command Willa hadn't heard before. Through the window they watched as Ethan strode to meet the approaching horseman. Even in the dim light of dusk, Willa could see the tension in his shoulders ease as he recognized the rider. "It's Miguel," Isabel said, relief evident in her voice. "Returned from Silver Creek." Minutes later, the door opened to admit both men. Miguel, Ethan's foreman, removed his hat respectfully when he saw Willa. "Senorita Harper," he greeted her. "I bring a letter for you, from the school board." He handed over an envelope addressed in a neat feminine hand. Willa opened it with fingers that trembled slightly, aware of Ethan watching her closely. "It's from Mrs. Abernathy," she explained as she read, "the head of the school board. She says they're relieved to hear of my survival and—" Willa's voice caught as she continued reading. "They've arranged for a substitute teacher temporarily, but assure me the position is still mine when I'm well enough to take it." The kindness of these strangers, people who had never even met her, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. After months of hardship and rejection, such simple decency seemed almost miraculous. "That's good news," Ethan said, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes," Willa agreed, though she felt a curious reluctance at the thought of leaving Westfield Ranch. In just 2 weeks, this place had begun to feel more like home than anywhere since her parents' house. Miguel cleared his throat. "There is other news as well, Patron. In town, they say 2 more of Harker's men were captured near Prescott, but Harker himself and one other escaped the posse." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. Jake Harker was still at large, potentially aware that Willa had survived to identify him. "We'll double the night watch," Ethan decided, his expression hardening. "Miguel, make sure every hand is armed. No one rides alone until further notice." "Sí, Patron." Miguel nodded, replacing his hat. "I will see to it now." After he left, Ethan turned to Willa, his blue eyes intense. "Nothing's changed. You're safe here." She wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. But as she clutched Mrs. Abernathy's letter, Willa couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change, whether they were prepared for it or not. The sound of hammering echoed across the ranch yard, sharp and rhythmic in the clear morning air. Willa followed the noise to a small outbuilding where Ethan was reinforcing the shutters, his sleeves rolled up to reveal sun-bronzed forearms corded with muscle. "More security measures?" she asked, shielding her eyes against the bright Arizona sunlight. Ethan glanced up, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of one hand. "Just being cautious." "How are you feeling today?" "Stronger," Willa replied truthfully. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival at Westfield Ranch, and her body was healing well. The bullet wound had closed cleanly, leaving only a tender pink scar beneath her ribs. "Dr. Evans says I can start taking short rides soon to build my strength back." "Good." Ethan returned to his work, driving another nail with precise force. "Isabel will be pleased. She thinks fresh air is the cure for everything." Willa smiled, leaning against the doorframe. "She's probably right." She watched him work for a moment, admiring the efficiency of his movements. There was nothing wasted in the way Ethan Westfield approached any task, whether managing the ranch, reading poetry, or preparing for potential danger. A thought struck her. "Have you ever had to defend the ranch before? Against outlaws, I mean." His rhythm faltered slightly, then resumed. "Twice. Cattle rustlers, mostly. Nothing like Harker's gang. I'm sorry to bring this trouble to your door." Ethan set down his hammer and turned to face her fully, his expression earnest. "You didn't bring trouble, Willa. Trouble found you. There's a difference." The distinction seemed important to him, and Willa felt something warm unfurl in her chest at his words. Since arriving at Westfield Ranch, she had encountered nothing but kindness, from Isabel's motherly care to Miguel's quiet courtesy to Ethan's steadfast protection. It was a stark contrast to the coldness she'd experienced after her parents' deaths, when even longtime acquaintances had distanced themselves from her reduced circumstances. Still, she persisted, I should be able to travel to Silver Creek soon. The school board has been patient, but they'll need their teacher eventually. Ethan studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes unreadable. Of course, he said finally, when Doc Evans says you're ready. Before she could respond, the sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. A rider was approaching at speed, dust billowing behind his horse. Ethan moved swiftly, positioning himself between Willa and the potential threat, his hand dropping to the gun at his hip. It's Rodriguez, he said as the rider came into view. One of the hands from the north pasture. The young cowboy reined his lathered horse to a stop before them, his face flushed with exertion and excitement. Senor Westfield, we found tracks, fresh ones. 3 riders moving along the northern boundary before dawn. Ethan's expression hardened. You're sure they weren't from the Sanderson spread? Si, patron. These men kept to the shadows, avoided the main trails. Miguel sent me to warn you while he and the others follow at a distance. Get inside, Ethan told Willa, his voice brooking no argument. Tell Isabel what's happening. Rodriguez, gather every man who's not on essential duties. Armed and mounted in 10 minutes. Willa wanted to protest but recognized the gravity in Ethan's demeanor. This wasn't just precaution. It was imminent threat. She hurried to the main house where Isabel was kneading bread dough in the kitchen. The housekeeper's hands stilled as Willa relayed the news, her normally cheerful face growing solemn. Dios nos ayude, she murmured, quickly wiping her hands on her apron. Come, we must prepare. To Willa's surprise, Isabel moved to a cabinet and withdrew a shotgun, checking it with practiced ease. Catching Willa's expression, the older woman's lips curved in a wry smile. You think because I am old I cannot shoot? In this country, everyone learns, even fine Boston ladies. The implied challenge snapped Willa out of her shock. Show me how, she said decisively. For the next few minutes, as men gathered in the yard outside, Isabel provided a rapid lesson in handling the weapon, how to load it, aim, and fire. The shotgun was heavy, its wooden stock smooth from years of use. You aim here, Isabel demonstrated, pointing to the center of her own chest. At close range, you cannot miss. The sound alone will often frighten away trouble. Through the window, Willa watched Ethan giving instructions to his men. His face was set in grim lines, all trace of the contemplative man who read poetry gone. This was the rancher, the protector, ready to defend what was his. The men dispersed, some heading north to join Miguel, others taking positions around the ranch buildings. Ethan himself returned to the house, striding into the kitchen with a rifle in hand. Rodriguez is staying with you two, he informed them. He'll be on the porch. I'm taking the rest of the men to find these trespassers. Be careful, senor, Isabel said, making the sign of the cross. Ethan nodded, then turned his attention to Willa. For a heartbeat, something vulnerable flashed in his eyes. Concern, perhaps, or something deeper. Stay inside, he instructed, no matter what you hear. Ethan, Willa began, but words failed her. What could she say in this moment? Be safe? Come back? Don't risk yourself for me? He seemed to understand her unspoken thoughts. With uncharacteristic impulsiveness, he reached out to briefly touch her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I'll return before sunset, he promised, and then he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Willa stood frozen, her hand rising unconsciously to the spot he'd touched, while Isabel watched with knowing eyes. The day stretched endlessly, each hour marked by increasing tension. Willa tried to occupy herself with mending, then reading, but found she couldn't concentrate. Every sound from outside sent her to the window, searching for signs of Ethan's return. Isabel maintained a show of ordinary routine, preparing dinner as if it were any other day, but Willa noticed the older woman's frequent glances toward the mantel clock. They should have found the trespassers by now, Willa said as the afternoon waned, unable to contain her worry any longer. See, Isabel agreed, her expression troubled. Unless the men they track are clever, leading them away from the ranch. The implication hung heavily in the air. What if the riders spotted near the boundary were merely a diversion, meant to draw Ethan and his men away? As if summoned by the thought, a gunshot cracked in the distance. Rodriguez shouted something from the porch. Isabel moved swiftly to the window, her face paling at what she saw. Two riders, she reported tersely, coming fast from the east, not our men. Willa joined her, heart pounding. Through the shimmering heat waves, she could make out two figures on horseback, approaching at a gallop. Rodriguez had taken cover behind a water trough, his rifle aimed at the intruders. "The shotgun," Isabel said, pressing the weapon into Willa's hands. "Remember what I taught you. Stay away from the windows." Another shot rang out, Rodriguez firing a warning. The riders kept coming, splitting to approach the house from different angles. They were close enough now for Willa to see that both wore bandanas pulled high over their faces. "Harker," she whispered, cold dread seizing her heart. One of the riders dismounted behind the barn, out of Rodriguez's line of sight. The other continued to circle, drawing the young ranch hand's attention with sporadic gunfire. It was a coordinated attack meant to divide their defenses. "They're trying to flank us," Willa realized aloud. "The one behind the barn will try to enter from the back." Isabel nodded grimly, retrieving a pistol from a drawer. "The cellar door. Go upstairs, querida. There is a small window in Ethan's room that overlooks the back. You can see anyone who approaches." "I'm not leaving you alone down here," Willa protested. "I am not alone," Isabel replied, holding up the pistol. "I have an old friend. Go, warn me if you see him coming." Reluctantly, Willa made her way upstairs, the shotgun heavy in her trembling hands. She had never been in Ethan's bedroom before, and even in this dire situation, she felt a momentary hesitation at the threshold, as if crossing it marked a boundary beyond mere physical space. The room was simply furnished, but scrupulously neat. A large bed dominated one wall, its quilt smoothed to military precision. A chest of drawers stood opposite, topped with a basin and pitcher. Near the window, a small desk held account books and writing materials. It was at this desk that Willa positioned herself, peering cautiously through the glass. From this vantage point, she could see the kitchen garden and the path leading to the cellar entrance. For several tense minutes, nothing moved except the shadows lengthening in the late afternoon sun. Then a figure darted between the garden rows, keeping low. The man was tall and wiry, with a red bandana covering the lower half of his face, just as Willa remembered from the stagecoach attack. Jake Harker himself. Fear paralyzed her momentarily, memories of gunfire and blood overwhelming her senses. But Isabel was downstairs, alone and vulnerable. The thought broke through Willa's terror. She had to warn the housekeeper. Moving as quietly as possible, Willa returned to the top of the stairs. "Isabel," she called in a harsh whisper. "He's coming to the cellar door. It's Harker." Isabel's response was immediate. "Stay where you are," she hissed back. "I am ready." Willa retreated to the bedroom window once more, torn between obeying Isabel's instruction and an overwhelming urge to help. Outside, Harker had reached the cellar entrance. He tested the doors cautiously, finding them locked. After a moment's consideration, he withdrew a knife from his boot and began working on the padlock. Sudden clarity washed over Willa. If Harker entered through the cellar, he would have the advantage of surprise despite Isabel's preparation. But if Willa remained at the window, she could stop him before he entered, or at least alert Isabel to the exact moment he breached the door. Decision made, she raised the shotgun, positioning it as Isabel had shown her. The weapon felt impossibly heavy, its barrel wavering as she tried to aim. Harker continued to work on the lock, oblivious to the danger above. Willa's finger hovered over the trigger. Could she do it? Could she shoot a man, even one as vicious as Harker? The memory of the stagecoach passengers, their lifeless bodies sprawled in the dust, strengthened her resolve. This man had murdered without hesitation. He would do so again if given the chance. Below, the padlock finally gave way under Harker's persistent efforts. He pulled the cellar doors open, a triumphant smile visible even beneath the bandana. As he prepared to descend, Willa squeezed the trigger. The shotgun's recoil slammed into her shoulder, nearly knocking her backward. The report was deafening in the confined space of the bedroom. Through watering eyes, Willa saw Harker dive to the side, the shot splintering the wooden cellar doors where he had stood a moment before. "Isabel," Willa shouted, "he's coming in!" Sounds of struggle reached her from downstairs. A crash, a muffled cry, another gunshot. Willa rushed for the stairs, the empty shotgun still clutched in her hands. As she reached the bottom step, the front door burst open, admitting the second rider. Caught between two threats, Willa froze. The newcomer raised his pistol, taking aim at her. Time seemed to slow, stretching each heartbeat into an eternity. Willa stared down the barrel of the gun, certain her last sight would be this stranger's cold eyes. Then, impossibly, the man's expression changed from determination to shock. He staggered forward, revealing Ethan standing in the doorway behind him, revolver drawn. The outlaw collapsed at Willa's feet, blood spreading across his back. "Willa!" Ethan's voice was hoarse with urgency. "Where's—" A shot from the kitchen cut off his question. Without hesitation, Ethan vaulted over the fallen outlaw, racing toward the sound with Willa close behind. They found Isabel backed against the stove, her pistol aimed steadily at Harker, who lay writhing on the floor, clutching his thigh. Blood seeped between his fingers, staining his dusty trousers. "You shot me, you old witch," he snarled, his face contorted with pain and rage. "And I will shoot you again if you move," Isabel replied calmly, though Willa could see the older woman's hands trembling slightly. Ethan crossed to Harker in two swift strides, kicking the outlaw's dropped weapon across the floor. "Jake Harker," he said, his voice cold. "Been expecting you." Harker spat on the floor. "Should have finished the job with the schoolteacher when I had the chance. Didn't think a woman would have the guts to identify me." "You misjudged her," Ethan replied, his eyes briefly meeting Willa's with unmistakable pride. "As you misjudged all of us." The sound of hoofbeats announced the arrival of more riders. Miguel appeared in the doorway, his normally placid face creased with concern. "Patron, we heard shooting." He broke off at the sight of Harker on the floor. "Ah, you found him." "Found his partner, too," Ethan confirmed grimly. "He's in the front hall, not breathing." "Good," Miguel said with uncharacteristic vehemence. "The other one, Carson, he led us on a false trail before we realized the trick and doubled back." His gaze shifted to Isabel, standing resolutely with her pistol still trained on Harker. "Are you injured, Senora?" "No, gracias a Dios," Isabel replied, finally lowering her weapon as Miguel and another ranch hand moved to secure Harker. "But it was close, if not for Senorita Harper's warning shot." Ethan turned to Willa then, truly looking at her for the first time since entering the kitchen. "You fired that shot from upstairs?" She nodded, suddenly aware that she was still clutching the empty shotgun in white-knuckled hands. Isabel showed me how. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes. Concern, admiration, and something else she couldn't quite name. He stepped closer, gently taking the shotgun from her grasp. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly, his gaze sweeping over her as if searching for injuries. "No," Willa assured him, though now that the immediate danger had passed, she found herself trembling uncontrollably. "Just shaken." Ethan's expression softened. Before she realized his intent, he had drawn her into his arms, holding her securely against his chest. Willa stiffened in surprise, then melted into the embrace, her body recognizing safety before her mind could process it. "I'm sorry," he murmured against her hair. "I should never have left you vulnerable." "You didn't," she whispered back. "Isabel is quite formidable." A low chuckle rumbled through his chest. "That she is." They remained like that for a long moment, as if neither wanted to be the first to pull away. It was Isabel who finally broke the spell, clearing her throat meaningfully. "The sheriff should be called," she said, studiously avoiding looking directly at them. "And this one needs a doctor before he bleeds on my clean floor." Reality reasserted itself. Ethan stepped back, his hands lingering briefly on Willa's arms before releasing her completely. "Miguel, send Rodriguez to fetch Sheriff Sullivan," and he instructed, "and get some men to deal with the body in the hall." He turned back to Willa, his expression grave. "It's over now. Harker's caught. You're safe." She wanted to believe him, but something felt unresolved, a lingering shadow at the edge of her consciousness. "How did he find me? How did he know I was here?" Harker laughed bitterly from the floor, where Miguel was binding his wounded leg. "Wasn't hard. This territory runs on gossip, lady. Word gets around when a stagecoach victim turns up alive on the mighty Westfield Ranch." "That's enough out of you," Ethan snapped. But Willa sensed truth in the outlaw's words. Arizona was sparsely populated. News traveled fast in such places. It had been naive to think she could remain hidden for long. What matters is that you're safe now, Ethan continued, as if reading her thoughts. Harker will hang for his crimes and you can go on with your life without looking over your shoulder. Go on with her life. The words should have brought relief, but instead they left Willa feeling strangely hollow, because going on meant leaving Westfield Ranch, leaving Isabel's motherly care, leaving Ethan's quiet company. It meant Silver Creek and a new beginning, the very thing she'd journeyed west to find. So why did the prospect now fill her with such uncertainty? Sheriff Sullivan arrived as dusk was falling, accompanied by 2 deputies and the territorial doctor. The lawman's weathered face broke into a rare smile when he saw Harker bound and guarded in the Westfield kitchen. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, removing his hat. "You finally slipped up, Jake." Harker glared but remained sullenly silent as the doctor examined his wound. "He'll live to hang," the physician pronounced, applying a bandage. "Clean shot, missed the major blood vessels." "Isabel has excellent aim," Ethan remarked dryly. The housekeeper sniffed, but Willa caught the hint of pride in her expression. "My Pablo taught me well. God rest his soul." While the deputies prepared to transport their prisoner back to town, Sullivan pulled Ethan and Willa aside for a private conversation in the study. "You should know," the sheriff began, "we've accounted for all of Harker's known associates now. Carson's dead, Thompson and Willis were caught in Tucson last week, and Miller's been in custody since that first stagecoach robbery 6 months back." "So it's truly over," Willa said, relief washing through her. Sullivan nodded. "Harker's reign of terror is done, but Miss Harper, I'll still need you to testify at his trial in Prescott next month. Your eyewitness account of the Stagecoach Massacre is crucial evidence." "Of course," Willa agreed. "I'll do whatever is necessary to see justice done." "Good woman," Sullivan approved. He turned to Ethan. "I'm sorry about the mess in your front hall, Westfield. We'll take care of the body, naturally." "Appreciate it, Sheriff." After the lawman departed with his prisoner and deputies, a strange quiet settled over the ranch house. The events of the day had left everyone exhausted, but too wired for sleep. Isabel busied herself preparing a late supper, while Miguel organized the night watch, a precaution despite Sullivan's assurances that the threat was neutralized. Willa found herself drawn to the porch, where the vast Arizona sky stretched above, stars emerging in the deepening twilight. The air was cooling rapidly, but she welcomed the chill against her flushed skin. Footsteps sounded behind her. Ethan joined her at the railing, offering a shawl that she gratefully wrapped around her shoulders. "How are you?" he asked simply. "I'm not sure," Willa answered honestly. "Relieved, certainly, but also unsettled somehow." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Battle reactions. My father experienced them after serving in the Mexican War. The danger passes, but the body remembers." They stood in companionable silence for a time, watching as the moon rose above the distant mountains, silvering the landscape. "I could have died today," Willa said eventually, her voice soft in the darkness. "We all could have, and I keep thinking about what would have been left undone, unsaid." Ethan shifted beside her, angling to see her face more clearly in the moonlight. "What would you have left unsaid, Willa?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. She had been speaking abstractly, not intending to invite such personal inquiry. Yet now, facing him in the gentle illumination of the moon, she found she wanted to answer truthfully. "I would have regretted not thanking you properly," she began carefully. "Not just for saving my life in the desert, but for everything since your hospitality, your protection, your friendship." "You've thanked me many times," he reminded her, his voice low. "Yes, but—" Willa hesitated, uncertain how to express the deeper gratitude she felt. For the quiet moments of connection, for being seen as a person of value after months of feeling invisible and unwanted. It's more than words can adequately convey. Ethan's gaze held hers steadily, something unspoken passing between them. "You don't owe me anything, Willa. Not gratitude, not obligation, nothing." "I know that," she replied, sensing he had misunderstood her meaning. "That's not why I—" A commotion from inside the house interrupted her. Isabel's voice called urgently, "Senor Ethan, riders approaching!" The tender moment shattered. Ethan was instantly alert, his hand moving to his gun before he strode quickly into the house. Willa followed, her heart racing anew. Had they been wrong about Harker's associates? Were there more outlaws unaccounted for? Miguel was already at the front window, rifle ready. 3 riders, he reported, coming from town. This late, Ethan frowned, checking his own weapon. Isabel, take Willa to the back room, just in case. No, Willa protested firmly. I won't hide again. Not after today. Before Ethan could argue, Miguel gave a short laugh of relief. It's all right, Patron. I recognize the lead horse. It's Sheriff Sullivan returning. Tension visibly eased from Ethan's shoulders. He moved to the door, opening it as the riders approached the house. Sullivan dismounted wearily, handing his reins to one of his deputies. Westfield, he called. Sorry to disturb you again so late, but there's been a development you need to know about. Ethan ushered the sheriff inside, where Isabel quickly provided coffee. Sullivan removed his hat, running a hand through thinning gray hair. Harker talked, he said without preamble. Trying to bargain for his life, I expect, though it won't do him any good. But what he said concerns Miss Harper directly. Willa felt Ethan move closer to her, as if preparing to shield her from whatever was coming. The stagecoach robbery wasn't random, Sullivan continued, his eyes on Willa. Harker was hired specifically to target that coach. He was given the schedule, the route, and a description of one particular passenger they wanted eliminated. Cold understanding dawned. Me, Willa whispered. Someone hired him to kill me? Sullivan nodded grimly. According to Harker, a man from back east paid him $500 to ensure you never reached Silver Creek. Paid half up front, half to be collected upon confirmation of your death. But why? The question burst from Ethan, his voice tight with contained anger. Who would want Willa dead? Harker claims he never met the man directly, dealt through an intermediary in Tucson. But he did provide a name, Blackwood, James Blackwood. The name hit Willa like a physical blow. Her legs weakened, and she sank into the nearest chair, blood draining from her face. James, that's impossible. You know this man? Sullivan asked sharply. He was my fiancé, Willa managed, her voice barely above a whisper. In Boston. But we parted ways months ago before I decided to come west. Not amicably, I take it, the sheriff observed. Willa's mind raced, trying to make sense of this revelation. James had been cold when he returned her ring, calculating in his assessment of her reduced value as a marriage prospect. But murderous? It seemed inconceivable. We parted because my family lost their fortune, she explained. James didn't want to marry a penniless schoolteacher, but that hardly seems reason enough to want me dead. Unless he feared you knew something that could damage him, Ethan suggested, his expression thoughtful. Something that might become public if you established yourself in a new community, made new connections. A memory stirred, James's uncharacteristic nervousness when her father's papers were being sorted after his death, his insistence on being present when the business correspondence was reviewed. At the time, grief-stricken and overwhelmed, Willa had thought nothing of it. Now, my father was an investor, she said slowly. He had business dealings with James's bank. Before he died, he mentioned concerns about some of the transactions, but I didn't pay much attention. I was focused on caring for them both during their illness. Sullivan leaned forward, interest sharpening his gaze. What kind of concerns? Irregularities in the accounts, discrepancies in the ledgers. Willa struggled to recall details from conversations half heard while nursing her parents. He said something about speaking to the bank's board of directors after he recovered. But he never recovered, Ethan finished quietly. Willa nodded, a horrifying possibility taking shape in her mind. And after his death, I was too distraught to question anything. James helped settle the estate, guided me through the sale of our home to pay my father's debts. I trusted him completely. Even though he broke your engagement when your circumstances changed, Isabel observed from her position near the doorway, her tone making clear what she thought of such behavior. I was hurt, but I understood his practical concerns, Willa admitted. Marriage in Boston society is as much a financial arrangement as a romantic one. But now I wonder if there was more to it, if he feared I might eventually discover something in my father's papers that could implicate him. Did you bring any of your father's business documents west with you? Sullivan asked. Willa shook her head, then stopped, remembering. Not business papers, no, but I did bring his personal journal. It was the one thing I couldn't bear to part with. Where is it now? In my trunk, with the few belongings I managed to save from the stagecoach. Sullivan stood. I'd like to see that journal, Miss Harper. If your suspicions are correct, it might contain evidence of criminal activity, evidence worth killing for. While Isabel led the sheriff to Willa's room to retrieve the journal, Ethan knelt beside Willa's chair, taking her trembling hands in his. Are you all right? He asked softly. She met his concerned gaze, finding strength in his steady presence. I'm shocked, but also strangely relieved to know it wasn't random, that the others on that stagecoach didn't die simply because I was there. Though that hardly makes it better for them or their families. None of this is your fault, Willa, Ethan said firmly. The responsibility lies entirely with Harker and the man who hired him. James, she whispered, still struggling to reconcile the elegant, ambitious banker she'd known with a man capable of arranging multiple murders. I was going to marry him, Ethan. I thought I knew him. People can hide their true nature, he replied, a shadow crossing his features, sometimes even from themselves. Before Willa could ask what he meant, Sullivan returned with her father's journal, a worn leather volume filled with Edward Harper's precise handwriting. The sheriff placed it on the table, opening to entries from the months before his death. For the next hour, they pored over the journal together, Willa translating her father's shorthand notations and explaining references to Boston businesses and financial practices. Gradually, a pattern emerged. Edward Harper had indeed uncovered evidence of embezzlement and fraud at Blackwood's bank. He had documented discrepancies, noted unusual transfers, and eventually traced the irregularities to James directly. He was planning to confront the bank's directors, Willa said, reading from the final entries. He had proof that James had been siphoning money from investors' accounts for years, disguising the losses as failed ventures. Sullivan whistled low. That's motive, all right. If this had come to light, your former fiancé would be facing prison, not to mention complete social and professional ruin. And when my father died unexpectedly, James must have thought the danger had passed. Willa continued, understanding dawning, until he learned I was heading west to start a new life, perhaps taking this journal with me, perhaps eventually examining it more closely and understanding what it contained. So he hired Harker to make sure you never reached Silver Creek, Ethan concluded grimly. And nearly succeeded, Sullivan added. But now we have him. Harker's testimony combined with this journal should be enough to bring charges against Blackwood. You'll need to go east, Ethan said to Sullivan, to Boston. Harker's word alone might not be enough to convince the authorities there to arrest someone of Blackwood's standing. The sheriff nodded. I've already wired the U.S. Marshal's office in Prescott. They're sending someone to take over the Harker case while I travel east with this evidence. He turned to Willa. Miss Harper, I'll need you to write out a full statement about your father's concerns and your relationship with Blackwood, and I may need you to testify in Boston eventually. Of course, Willa agreed, though the thought of returning east, of facing James in a courtroom, filled her with dread. Whatever is necessary. After Sullivan departed, promising to return the following day for her statement, a heavy silence fell over the ranch house. Isabel quietly excused herself to bed, leaving Ethan and Willa alone in the study. It's a lot to absorb, Ethan said finally, refilling their coffee cups from the pot Isabel had left warming on the hearth. Yes, Willa agreed, accepting the cup gratefully. To think that all those people died because James wanted to silence me, when I didn't even know what I possessed. He couldn't take that chance, Ethan observed. Men like that see people as obstacles or tools, nothing more. The bitterness in his tone caught Willa's attention. You sound as if you've known such men. Ethan was silent for a long moment, staring into the dying fire. When he spoke, his voice was distant, as if coming from a place deep within memory. I knew one. Richard Carruthers. He owned the neighboring ranch to ours when we first came west. He paused, taking a slow breath. He was wealthy, respected, and utterly ruthless. He wanted our water rights, tried to pressure my father into selling when we first arrived. When that failed, he turned to more direct methods. Willa set down her cup, sensing they had reached a pivotal moment, that Ethan was about to share something he rarely discussed. What happened? She asked gently. Carruthers hired men to intimidate us. Cattle were scattered, fences cut. We stood our ground, but it was difficult. His jaw tightened at the memory. Then 5 years ago, there was a raid, supposedly Apache, but the tracks told a different story. Understanding dawned. The attack you mentioned before, when your fiancé died. Ethan nodded, paint-etching lines around his eyes. Sarah Connolly, her father's ranch bordered ours to the south. We'd been engaged just a month when the raid happened. She was visiting that day, along with her father. Willa's heart contracted at the thought of what was coming. Oh, Ethan, I'm so sorry. Carruthers' men were disguised as Apache, but they made mistakes, left evidence of white men's boots, used weapons the Apache wouldn't have had access to. They killed Sarah, her father, and two of our hands before we drove them off. His voice grew hard. Sheriff Sullivan investigated, but Carruthers had alibis arranged, paid witnesses. Nothing could be proven. What happened to him? Willa asked, dreading the answer. He died a year later. Riding accident. Ethan's expression revealed nothing. His heirs sold the ranch and moved back east. We bought the water rights my father had wanted all along. The stark simplicity of his recounting couldn't hide the devastating impact these events must have had on him. Willa understood now why Ethan had retreated into solitude, why he concealed his sensitive nature behind a rancher's practical exterior. He had lost not only the woman he loved, but his faith in justice. And now you've taken in another Easterner with dangerous connections, she said quietly. Put yourself and your people at risk again. Ethan turned to her then, his eyes intense in the firelight. The situations aren't comparable, Willa. You were a victim, not a threat. And the danger you faced, he broke off, struggling visibly with his emotions. When I found you in the desert, something in me recognized something in you. I can't explain it better than that. I just knew I couldn't lose you. The rawness of his admission hung in the air between them. Willa felt tears spring to her eyes, overwhelmed by his words and their implications. When I was wandering after the stagecoach attack, she confessed softly, I kept going because giving up felt like letting James win somehow, letting him take everything from me, even my life. I didn't expect to survive. But then you found me, and suddenly surviving wasn't enough. I wanted to live again. Ethan moved closer, his hand covering hers where it rested on the arm of her chair. And now, what do you want now, Willa? It was a question she had been asking herself with increasing frequency over the past weeks. The answer had seemed clear when she first came west. A teaching position, independence, a fresh start. But now everything had shifted. The woman who had boarded that stagecoach in Tucson no longer existed. In her place stood someone shaped by survival, by loss, by unexpected kindness, and by the growing awareness that what had begun as gratitude toward Ethan Westfield had transformed into something far deeper and more complex. Before she could formulate a response, a sharp knock at the front door startled them both. Ethan's hand moved instinctively to his gun as he rose. Who would call at this hour? Willa wondered, glancing at the mantel clock, which showed well past midnight. Stay here, Ethan instructed, moving cautiously to the hallway. Voices drifted back to Willa, Ethan's questioning, then a woman's anxious reply. Curious, she approached the doorway in time to see a middle-aged woman in traveling clothes being ushered into the house. Miss Harper, the woman called, spotting Willa. Oh, thank goodness you're safe. I've been so worried since we received word of the stagecoach attack. I'm sorry, Willa said, confused. You have the advantage of me, Mrs. Abernathy, the woman supplied, from the Silver Creek School Board. When Sheriff Sullivan passed through town this evening and mentioned the events here, I insisted on coming immediately. We've been frantic with concern. Understanding dawned. This was the Mrs. Abernathy who had written to reassure Willa about her teaching position, the very position that now seemed increasingly distant from her thoughts and desires. It's very kind of you to come personally, Willa said, accepting the older woman's impulsive hug, especially at such an hour. Nonsense! After all you've endured, the least we can do is show our support. Mrs. Abernathy held Willa at arm's length, examining her with motherly concern. And now I can report back to the board that you're recovering well and will be ready to assume your duties soon. The children are so looking forward to meeting their new teacher. The simple statement hung in the air like a premonition. Willa felt rather than saw Ethan stiffen beside her. The future she had planned, the commitment she had made, was rapidly approaching. Silver Creek awaited its new school teacher. The life she had envisioned before the stagecoach, before the desert, before Ethan, was still there for the taking. Yet as Mrs. Abernathy chatted enthusiastically about the school and its pupils, Willa found her gaze drawn repeatedly to Ethan's carefully neutral expression, and she wondered, with a mixture of hope and trepidation, if the path ahead might yet hold unexpected turns. Mrs. Abernathy's arrival changed everything. She brought with her not just news from Silver Creek, but a tangible reminder of the commitment Willa had made before the stagecoach attack, before Westfield Ranch, before Ethan. Despite the late hour, Isabel insisted on providing refreshments. Soon they were settled in the sitting room, Mrs. Abernathy eagerly sharing details about the school and community, while Willa listened with growing uncertainty. "The schoolhouse has been freshly whitewashed," Mrs. Abernathy explained, her plump hands animated as she spoke. "And Mr. Peterson, he's on the school board too, donated new slates for the children. We have 23 pupils enrolled, ages 6 to 14. "That's a good number," Willa responded automatically, her teaching instincts engaging despite her conflicted feelings. "Indeed, and several of the older children are quite advanced. Young Thomas Riley has a particular aptitude for mathematics. I'm certain you'll find him a rewarding student." Throughout this exchange, Ethan remained silent, standing near the window with his back partially turned, as if giving them privacy while remaining protectively present. The rigid set of his shoulders spoke volumes to Willa, who had learned to read his subtle expressions over the past weeks. "When do you anticipate Miss Harper will be ready to assume her position?" Mrs. Abernathy asked, addressing Ethan directly. He turned slowly, his face carefully composed. "That would be for Doc Evans to determine. And Miss Harper herself, of course." Of course, Mrs. Abernathy agreed hastily. "We wouldn't dream of rushing her recovery. But the substitute teacher can only stay until the end of the month, and the children really do need stability." The pressure of expectations settled over Willow like a physical weight. 2 weeks, that was all the time she had to decide her future. "I understand the school's needs," she said carefully, "and I'm grateful for the board's patience. As soon as Dr. Evans declares me fit for travel, we can make definite arrangements." This seemed to satisfy Mrs. Abernathy, who launched into descriptions of available accommodations in Silver Creek. The town's boarding house had a room reserved for the school teacher, small but comfortable, with a separate entrance and a view of the mountains. As the older woman spoke, Willa found her attention drifting to Ethan, who had moved to tend the fire. In the dancing firelight, his profile was sharply defined, the straight nose, firm jaw, and thoughtful brow she had come to know so well. The thought of leaving this house, of not seeing that face each day, created an unexpected ache in her chest. Eventually, despite Isabel's offer of a guest room, Mrs. Abernathy insisted on returning to town. "The stage leaves at noon tomorrow, and I have several errands before I depart. Sheriff Sullivan was kind enough to arrange an escort back to Silver Creek tonight." As they said their goodbyes at the door, the school board representative clasped Willa's hands warmly. "We're so blessed to have found a teacher of your caliber, Miss Harper. Silver Creek may be small, but we value education highly. You'll be making a real difference in these children's lives." The sincerity in her voice struck Willa deeply. This was exactly what she had wanted. The opportunity to shape young minds, to create a meaningful life after the losses she had endured. Why then did the prospect now fill her with such conflicting emotions? After Mrs. Abernathy's departure, an awkward silence fell over the ranch house. Isabel made a show of clearing the coffee cups, her knowing eyes moving between Willa and Ethan. "It is late," she announced finally. "We should all rest. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." With that practical wisdom, she retired to her quarters, leaving Willa and Ethan alone in the sitting room. Neither spoke immediately, the crackling fire the only sound in the otherwise silent house. "She seems very dedicated to the school," Ethan observed finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes," Willa agreed. "Silver Creek is fortunate to have such passionate advocates for education." Another silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken thoughts and questions. "Ethan," Willa began hesitantly, "about what you asked before, what I want now." He raised a hand, stopping her. "Don't answer that tonight. There's been too much happening, too many revelations. You need time to think clearly." Part of Willa was relieved at the reprieve, while another part longed to express the tumult of emotions she was experiencing. But Ethan was right. This wasn't a decision to be made in the emotional aftermath of the day's events. Thank you, she said simply. He nodded, moving toward the door. Rest well, Willa. As he turned to go, a sudden impulse seized her. Ethan? When he paused, looking back, she continued, Would you, would you read something before we retire? Something peaceful, to replace the day's chaos with better thoughts. Surprise flickered across his features, followed by a softening that transformed his entire countenance. Without a word, he crossed to the bookshelf and selected a slim volume. Tennyson Rice, he explained, returning to sit in the chair opposite hers. My mother's favorite after Wordsworth. Opening to a marked page, he began to read in his deep, steady voice. Tears, idle tears. I know not what they mean. Tears from the depth of some divine despair rise in the heart and gather to the eyes, in looking on the happy autumn fields, and thinking of the days that are no more. The poignancy of the words washed over Willa, reflecting her own complex emotions. As Ethan continued reading, the day's tensions gradually eased from her body. There was something profoundly intimate about sharing this moment, this appreciation of beauty amid life's hardships, this recognition of mutual understanding. When he finished reading, Ethan closed the book quietly, his eyes meeting hers across the space between them. Thank you, Willa said softly. That was exactly what I needed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Poetry has that power to say what we cannot find words for ourselves. In that moment, Willa knew with sudden clarity that whatever decision she made about her future, it would have to account for this connection, this rare and precious understanding she had found with Ethan Westfield. The question was whether such a bond could survive the expectations and obligations that pulled at them both. Dr. Evans arrived the following morning, having been summoned by Isabel to check Willa after the previous day's excitement. The physician was a gruff, practical man in his 60s, with kind eyes that belied his brusque manner. Well, young lady, he announced after examining her, you're healing remarkably well. The bullet wound is nearly fully closed, and your strength is returning nicely. Then I'm fit to travel? Willa asked, aware of Isabel hovering nearby, pretending to dust while clearly listening to every word. Evans considered, stroking his salt and pepper beard. I'd say another week of rest to be safe, then yes, you should be able to make the journey to Silver Creek. It's not far, 20 miles or so, but the roads can be rough. Willa nodded, processing this information. 1 week, 7 days to decide the course of her future. Thank you, doctor, she said aloud. You've been very kind. Evans waved away her gratitude. Just doing my job. Though I'll admit it's not often I get to treat someone who's survived both a gunshot wound and 3 days in the desert. You're made of sturdy stuff, Miss Harper. After the doctor departed, Willa found herself restless. The walls of the ranch house, which had provided such comforting shelter during her recovery, suddenly felt confining. She needed fresh air, open space, room to think. Isabel, ever perceptive, noticed her agitation. Perhaps a short ride would do you good, she suggested. The mare, Daisy, is gentle enough for a novice. Do you think Ethan would mind? Willa asked, brightening at the prospect. Mind? Pah! Isabel dismissed the concern with a wave. He would insist if he were here instead of checking the north pasture. I will have Miguel saddle the horse for you. An hour later, Willa was mounted on a placid chestnut mare, slowly following a well-worn trail that led toward a stand of cottonwood trees marking a small creek. The day was pleasantly warm, a light breeze tempering the sun's heat. After weeks of convalescence, the simple act of riding, of controlling her own movement through the landscape, felt exhilarating. The cottonwoods proved to be a small oasis in the desert terrain. Beneath their shade, the temperature dropped noticeably, and the sound of running water created a soothing background melody. Willa dismounted carefully, tethering Daisy to a low branch where the mare could reach both shade and grass. Settling on a large, flat rock beside the creek, Willa removed her borrowed hat, one of Isabel's that the housekeeper had insisted she wear against the sun. The water burbled over smooth stones, creating tiny rapids and eddies that caught the light. It was peaceful here, removed from the demands and expectations that had followed Mrs. Abernathy's visit. Willa's thoughts turned to Silver Creek and the teaching position awaiting her. It represented everything she had journeyed west to find. Independence, purpose, a fresh start. The children Mrs. Abernathy described needed a dedicated teacher, someone who would open their minds to possibilities beyond the frontier. Yet the prospect of leaving Westfield Ranch created a hollow feeling in her chest. Over the past weeks, she had begun to feel part of something here, not just a guest recovering from injury, but someone who belonged. Isabel treated her like a daughter. Miguel and the other hands tipped their hats respectfully when they saw her. And Ethan had become central to her days in ways she hadn't anticipated. His quiet strength, his hidden depth, his unexpected vulnerability, all had combined to create a powerful attraction that went far beyond gratitude for her rescue. When she tried to imagine not seeing him each day, not sharing quiet evenings discussing books or ranch matters, not catching the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the future seemed suddenly dimmer. "I thought I might find you here," came Ethan's voice, interrupting her reverie. Willa turned, startled, to find him approaching on horseback. He dismounted smoothly, tethering his stallion near Daisy before joining her by the creek. "Isabel told me you'd gone riding," he explained, settling beside her on the rock. "Feeling restless?" "I needed to think," she admitted, "somewhere with space and quiet." He nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. That was one of the things she valued most about Ethan, his capacity to comprehend what remained unspoken. "This is one of my favorite spots on the ranch," he told her, gesturing to the small grove. "My father and I camped here the first night we arrived, 15 years ago. He said the trees were a good omen, life persisting against the odds." Willa smiled, imagining a younger Ethan and his father making their first claim on this land. He was right. There's something miraculous about finding such greenery in the desert. They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching the play of light on water. Birds flitted between the cottonwood branches, their calls creating a natural counterpoint to the creek's constant murmur. "Doc Evans says I'll be fit to travel in a week," Willa said finally, addressing the subject that hovered between them. Ethan nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "That's good news. You've healed well." "Yes." She hesitated, then continued. "Mrs. Abernathy made it clear that Silver Creek needs its teacher by the end of the month. Their substitute can't stay longer." "I see." His voice revealed nothing of his feelings, but Willa noticed his hands, usually so steady, fidgeting with a small stone. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken thoughts. Willa gathered her courage, determined to address directly what they had been circling around for days. "Ethan," she began, "these past weeks at your ranch have meant more to me than I can express. You and Isabel have become—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Family, almost. The thought of leaving is far more difficult than I expected it would be." He turned to look at her then, his blue eyes intense. "Then don't leave." The simple statement hung in the air between them, profound in its directness. "But the school," Willa protested weakly. "My commitment." "Silver Creek is 20 miles away," Ethan pointed out. "Many of my men ride further than that in a day's work. You could stay at the ranch and travel to town each day to teach." Hope flared briefly in Willa's chest, then dimmed. "That would be exhausting long-term. And in winter, when the weather turns—" "Then we'd find you lodging in town during the worst weather," he continued, clearly having given this considerable thought. "And eventually, perhaps—" He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Willa waited, heart pounding, for him to complete the thought. "Eventually?" she prompted gently. Ethan stood abruptly, pacing a few steps away before turning back to her, resolve evident in his bearing. "I have something to show you," he said, extending his hand to help her up. "A short ride from here." Curious, Willa allowed him to assist her back onto Daisy. They rode side by side for about 15 minutes, following the creek upstream until they reached a small rise. As they crested it, Willa gasped at the view that opened before them. Below lay a natural basin, sheltered by low hills on three sides. A clear pond, fed by the same creek they had been following, glittered in the sunlight. Near it stood the stone foundation of what had once been a substantial building, though only portions of the walls remained. "What is this place?" Willa asked as they dismounted. "Originally a Spanish mission outpost, abandoned long before American settlers arrived," Ethan explained, leading her closer to the ruins. "My father purchased this section specifically because of the reliable water source. He always thought it had potential for something more than cattle grazing." He gestured around the basin with evident pride. "Good water, natural protection from the worst winds, fertile soil near the creek. It's ideal for a small community. Understanding began to dawn on Willa. A community? You mean? I've been thinking about it since you first mentioned your teaching position, Ethan confirmed, his eyes lighting with rare animation. There are at least a dozen children within riding distance of this ranch whose families can't send them to Silver Creek because it's too far. Ranch kids mostly, and a few from the mining families to the north. The vision took shape in Willa's mind, not just a school, but a gathering place for the isolated families scattered across this harsh landscape, a place where children could learn, where community could form despite the vast distances separating homesteads. You would build a school here? She asked, hardly daring to believe what he was suggesting. Not right away, Ethan admitted. You should fulfill your commitment to Silver Creek first. But in time, yes, the foundation is already solid. We would need to rebuild the walls, add a proper roof, furnishings. He was already planning, already seeing the possibility as reality. Willa found herself caught up in his enthusiasm, her own imagination adding details. Bookshelves along the walls, desks arranged in rows, perhaps even a small bell to call children to lessons. It's a wonderful idea, she said softly. But Ethan, why would you do this? The expense, the effort, just to keep me here? The direct question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked away, focusing on the distant mountains as he gathered his thoughts. Not just to keep you here, he said finally, turning back to meet her gaze. Though that's part of it, yes, but also because it's the right thing to do. These children deserve education, and their families shouldn't have to choose between working their land and schooling their young. His sincerity touched Willa deeply. This wasn't simply a grand gesture to win her favor, but a genuine commitment to improving life in this remote corner of the territory. There's something else, Ethan continued, his voice dropping slightly. Something I've been wanting to tell you, but the timing never seemed right. Willa's pulse quickened at his serious tone. What is it? When I found you in the desert, I didn't just stumble across you by chance. He drew a deep breath. I'd been having dreams, vivid ones, of someone most injured on my land. For 3 nights before you arrived, I saw the same image. A figure in blue collapsed near the south boundary. Willa stared at him, astonished. You dreamt of me before you found me? Not of you specifically. I couldn't see a face, just the blue dress. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable with the admission. I know how it sounds. My father would have called it nonsense, superstition. But the dreams were so persistent that I changed my usual route that day, rode the south boundary instead of checking the north pasture as planned. And found me, Willa finished softly. Ethan nodded, watching her cautiously as if expecting disbelief or mockery. Instead, Willa felt a profound sense of wonder. She had never been particularly superstitious, but her ordeal in the desert had shown her how thin the line between life and death could be, how many coincidences and chances had aligned to keep her alive. Was it so impossible that something beyond ordinary understanding had guided Ethan to her? I believe you, she said simply. Relief washed over his features, followed by something deeper, a vulnerability he rarely allowed to surface. I've never told anyone about the dreams, he confessed. Not even Isabel. But I needed you to know because... He hesitated, then continued with quiet intensity. Because I believe you were meant to come here, Willa, on not just to Silver Creek, but to Westfield Ranch specifically, to this place. The conviction in his voice stirred something in Willa, a recognition of possibility, of paths aligning in ways she couldn't have anticipated. She thought of all the decisions and circumstances that had brought her west, that had placed her on that particular stagecoach, that had allowed her to survive when others hadn't. Coincidence? Or something more purposeful? To you, she added softly, completing what he hadn't quite said. Their eyes held for a long moment, the connection between them almost tangible in the clear desert air. Yes, Ethan acknowledged finally. To me. He moved closer, reaching tentatively to take her hands in his. I know it's too soon. We've known each other barely a month, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Willa's heart beat rapidly against her ribs as she waited for him to continue, hardly daring to breathe. I'm not asking for an answer now, Ethan said carefully. You have a commitment to honor in Silver Creek, and I respect that. But when you're ready, if you ever are, I want you to know that there's a place for you here. Not just as a teacher for a future school, but as, he trailed off, seeming to search for the right words. Willa found them for him. As your wife? She asked softly. A flush rose on his tanned cheeks, but his gaze remained steady. Yes, if you'd consider it. The directness of his quasi-proposal should have shocked her, yet somehow it felt entirely natural, a simple acknowledgement of what had been growing between them since that first day in the desert. I would, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Consider it, I mean. But you're right, there's the school in Silver Creek first. Relief and joy transformed Ethan's face, making him look younger, less careworn. Then we'll start there. You'll teach in town while staying at the ranch. I'll escort you each day until you're comfortable with the route. The practical details grounded what might otherwise have seemed an impossible dream. Willa could see it working, teaching during the day, returning to the ranch each evening, gradually becoming part of the rhythm of this place and its people. And in time, Ethan continued, his enthusiasm building, we'll build the school here. Not just a simple classroom, but something more substantial. He began sketching in the dirt with a stick, his engineer's mind mapping out the possibilities. The main building would use the existing foundation with large windows to catch the morning light. We could add a small library wing here, he indicated a spot to the east, and perhaps living quarters for a teacher in the future. The creek provides water year-round, so gardens would be possible. The families would help build it, Willa realized, the vision expanding in her mind. A true community effort. Exactly. The Sandersons have a son who's good with carpentry. The Rileys could donate lumber from their mill. Everyone contributes what they can. And it wouldn't just be for children, Willa added, excitement building in her voice. Adults could come for evening classes. Many of the ranchers' wives never had formal education, and some of the ranch hands can't read or write. Ethan's eyes lit up at her additions to the plan. A gathering place for everyone, not just a school. A center for the entire region, she agreed, marveling at how their separate dreams seemed to fit together like pieces of a puzzle. After months of loss and uncertainty, the future suddenly stretched before her, full of purpose and possibility. I need to write to Mrs. Abernathy, she realized aloud. To explain the arrangement with Silver Creek, that would be the first step. Ethan nodded, his expression sobering slightly. Silver Creek might not approve. They expected their teacher to live in town. They wanted a committed teacher, Willa countered, and they'll still have one. The children won't suffer because I return to the ranch each evening instead of the boarding house. The confidence in her voice surprised even her. Weeks ago, she would have been anxious about challenging expectations, about potentially disappointing the school board. Now she found herself willing to stand firm for what she wanted, what felt right. They remained at the old mission site for another hour, walking the perimeter of the foundation, discussing how the school might be laid out, where additional structures could be added as the community grew. In Ethan's company, Willa found herself dreaming bigger than she ever had before. Not just a simple schoolroom, but a true center for learning and gathering in this isolated region. As the sun began its westward descent, they reluctantly mounted their horses for the return journey to the ranch. Riding beside Ethan, Willa felt a sense of rightness, of belonging that had eluded her since her parents' deaths. The desert landscape, which had nearly claimed her life, now stretched around her like a promise, harsh but beautiful, demanding but rewarding to those who respected its ways. The following week passed in a flurry of preparation. Once Willa had made her decision known, Isabel threw herself into readying her for the new arrangement with characteristic efficiency. The housekeeper altered several of Ethan's sister's old riding skirts to fit Willa better for the daily journey to town, while Ethan himself selected a gentle but sure-footed gelding from his herd to be her personal mount. Sheriff Sullivan returned as promised to take Willa's full statement regarding James Blackwood and the evidence in her father's journal. The lawman was scheduled to depart for Boston the following week, carrying both the journal and formal charges against Blackwood. I'll need to send a wire when the Boston authorities take him into custody, Sullivan explained. You may be called to testify eventually, though the journal itself is pretty damning evidence. The thought of facing James again, of seeing him brought to justice for his crimes, created mixed emotions for Willa. There was satisfaction, certainly, in knowing that her father's suspicions would finally be vindicated. But there was also a deep sadness at the corruption of someone she had once trusted completely. "I'll testify if necessary," she assured the sheriff. "Those people on the stagecoach deserve justice." Sullivan nodded approvingly. "That's a courageous attitude, Miss Harper. Too many folks would rather look the other way than confront ugly truths." After the sheriff departed, Willa wrote a careful letter to Mrs. Abernathy explaining her intention to honor her teaching commitment while residing at Westfield Ranch. She was direct but diplomatic, emphasizing her dedication to the students while requesting this accommodation for personal reasons. "Will they accept the arrangement, and do you think?" she asked Ethan, as Miguel prepared to deliver the letter to Silver Creek. "They'd be fools not to," he replied with confidence. "Qualified teachers aren't exactly abundant in the territory, and 20 miles is nothing on a good horse." His certainty bolstered her own, but Willa couldn't help worrying. She had committed to Silver Creek in good faith. Altering the terms now felt somewhat presumptuous. Yet the alternative, living in town, seeing Ethan only occasionally, had become unthinkable. Mrs. Abernathy's response arrived 3 days later. The school board had reluctantly approved Willa's proposal, with the stipulation that she must arrive punctually for classes regardless of weather conditions and should be prepared to stay in town if storms made travel unsafe. "These are reasonable terms," Ethan acknowledged when she shared the letter with him. "We can certainly work with them." Relief washed through Willa. The first potential obstacle had been overcome. Now she could look forward to beginning her teaching duties with a clear conscience, knowing she was honoring both her professional commitment and her personal inclinations. As the day of her first class approached, however, new anxieties arose. What if the children resented having a teacher from the East? What if her methods proved unsuitable for these frontier pupils? What if the daily ride proved more taxing than anticipated? Isabel, ever perceptive, noticed her increasing tension. The evening before her first day, the housekeeper found Willa in the library, restlessly reorganizing books she had already arranged twice. "Ah, querida," Isabel said gently, "the night before battle is always the hardest." Willa turned, managing a weak smile. "Is it that obvious?" To these old eyes, yes. Isabel guided her to a chair. "Sit, I have brought tea." As they sipped the fragrant brew, Isabel shared stories of her own first days in new situations. Coming to America as a young bride, learning English from her husband's employer, taking over a ranch kitchen with limited experience. "Always there is fear before new beginnings," she concluded. "It is normal. But you are strong, Willa. Stronger than you know." "Thank you, Isabel," Willa said, genuinely touched by the older woman's support. "I don't know what I'd have done without you these past weeks." Isabel patted her hand affectionately. "You would have managed, but I am glad you did not have to." Later that evening, unable to settle, Willa wandered onto the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the vast desert sky like diamond dust. She leaned against a post, breathing in the cooler air, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Footsteps sounded behind her. Ethan joined her at the railing, his presence solid and reassuring. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked quietly. "Terrified," Willa admitted with a small laugh. "What if they hate me?" "They won't," he assured her. "Children respond to sincerity and care. You have both in abundance." His confidence in her was both flattering and steadying. Over the past month, Ethan had come to know her better than anyone ever had. Her strengths and vulnerabilities, her hopes and fears. His belief in her capabilities meant more than any formal certification or academic achievement. "I'll be with you," he reminded her, "at least for the first few days until you're comfortable with the road." The thought of his escort eased some of her anxiety. They would face this first challenge together, as they had faced Harker's attack, as they would face whatever came next. Impulsively, Willa reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. Ethan glanced down in surprise, then tightened his grip gently, a smile softening his features in the moonlight. They stood like that for a long while, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead, drawing strength from each other's presence. No words were necessary. The simple contact of hand in hand spoke volumes. Silver Creek proved to be a typical frontier town. One main street lined with essential businesses, smaller residential streets branching off, a church with a modest steeple, and at the edge of town, the schoolhouse. The building was larger than Willa had expected, freshly whitewashed as Mrs. Abernathy had promised, with a bell tower and a flagpole standing tall beside it. As Ethan helped her dismount, Willa smoothed her riding skirt nervously. She had worn her best blouse for the occasion and pinned her hair severely back, hoping to present an image of competent authority despite her youth. "You look fine," Ethan assured her, reading her thoughts. Every inch the proper schoolmarm. Despite her nerves, Willa had to smile at his teasing tone. "That's the general idea, Mr. Westfield." Children were already gathering in the schoolyard, eyeing the newcomers with undisguised curiosity. Willa noted the diversity of her future pupils, some clearly from more prosperous families in pressed clothes and polished shoes, others in homespun garments that spoke of harder circumstances. All, however, displayed the same healthy outdoor coloring and self-reliant bearing characteristic of frontier children. Mrs. Abernathy hurried from the building to greet them, her round face beaming with welcome. "Miss Harper, Mr. Westfield, you're early, excellent. Let me introduce you to some of our school board members before the children come inside." The next hour passed in a whirl of introductions and orientation. Willa was shown the classroom, the small office where she could prepare lessons, the woodshed where fuel for the stove was stored. Everyone was polite, though she sensed some reservation regarding her living arrangement. Several glances were exchanged when Mrs. Abernathy mentioned that Mr. Westfield would be escorting their new teacher daily from his ranch. Finally, the school bell rang, summoning the children inside. Ethan squeezed her hand briefly in encouragement before taking his leave. "I'll return at 4, he promised. "Good luck." Drawing a deep breath, Willa entered the classroom to face 23 curious faces. The pupils stood beside their desks, as was customary when a teacher entered. "Good morning," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. "I am Miss Harper, your new teacher. I'm very pleased to meet you all." A chorus of "Good morning, Miss Harper" responded, some voices enthusiastic, others merely polite. Willa moved to the desk at the front of the room, placing her books upon it with deliberate care. "Before we begin our lessons, I'd like to learn something about each of you," she continued. "When I call your name from the register, please stand and tell me one thing you hope to learn this year." This approach, departing from the strict formality some might expect, caused a ripple of surprise through the classroom. But as the first child rose to speak, then the next, Willa saw interest kindling in their eyes. By the time the last pupil had shared, a tentative connection had been established. The morning proceeded better than Willa had dared hope. Years of teaching in Boston had prepared her well for managing different age groups and abilities simultaneously. She assigned the older students independent work while focusing on basics with the younger children, circulating constantly to provide assistance and maintain order. By noon, when the children were dismissed for lunch, Willa felt cautiously optimistic. These pupils might be frontier-raised, with different experiences and expectations than her Boston students, but the fundamentals of learning remained the same. They responded to clear instruction, fair treatment, and genuine interest in their progress. The afternoon session passed equally well. Thomas Riley, the mathematically inclined student Mrs. Abernathy had mentioned, indeed showed remarkable aptitude. Emma Sanderson, a quiet girl of 12, revealed an extensive vocabulary and love of reading that Willa made note to nurture. Even the rowdier boys settled down when engaged with topics that captured their interest, particularly geography and the mechanics of simple machines. When 4 o'clock arrived, Willa found herself genuinely reluctant to end the day. The children filed out with varying expressions of relief and interest, several of the younger ones offering shy smiles that warmed her heart. Mrs. Abernathy bustled in as the last pupil departed. "Well, how was your first day, Miss Harper?" "Wonderful," Willa replied honestly. "You have some very bright students here." "And how did they respond to you?" the older woman pressed, clearly anxious for a positive report. "Better than I expected. There's natural reserve, of course, but I believe we've made a good beginning." Mrs. Abernathy beamed with satisfaction. "I knew you were the right choice for Silver Creek. Just wait until word spreads that our new teacher actually enjoys her pupils. Parents who've been hesitant to enroll their children will be lining up at your door." As predicted, Ethan arrived promptly at 4, tying his horse beside Willa's gelding at the hitching post. Mrs. Abernathy insisted on inviting him in for coffee, an offer he accepted with gracious formality. Willa noted how carefully Ethan maintained a respectful distance between them in public, conscious of propriety and reputation. Only when they were riding back toward the ranch, safely beyond the town's curious eyes, did he ask the question that clearly burned in his mind. How was it, truly? Willa's face broke into a genuine smile, weeks of anxiety falling away in the light of actual experience. Truly? It was everything I hoped teaching would be. The children are eager to learn, even the reluctant ones, and the school board has provided adequate materials. Nothing like Boston's resources, of course, but sufficient for our needs. Our needs, Ethan repeated, catching the possessive plural. You're already claiming them as your own. I suppose I am, she acknowledged, slightly surprised at herself. They're good children, Ethan. Even the difficult ones have potential. He nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. I knew you'd be an excellent teacher. It's in your nature to see the best in others, to encourage growth. The simple observation touched Willa deeply. James had praised her accomplishments, her social graces, her suitable background, never her essential character or natural gifts. Ethan saw her differently, recognizing qualities she hardly acknowledged in herself. They rode in companionable silence for a time, the horses maintaining an easy pace side by side. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the trail, while distant mountains stood purple against the horizon. Willa found herself savoring the moment, the successful completion of her first day teaching, the beauty of the landscape, the presence of the man beside her. For the first time since her parents' deaths, the future stretched before her, not as a void to be endured, but as a path to be embraced. As they rode, Willa's hand unconsciously reached for the chain around her neck, where she kept half of her severed engagement ring, the physical reminder of James's betrayal she had carried all this time. The small weight that had once felt like an anchor now seemed strangely insignificant. She realized she hadn't thought about it in days. What are you thinking about? Ethan asked, noticing her distracted gesture. Willa hesitated, then drew out the chain from beneath her collar. The half ring caught the late afternoon sunlight, its broken edge glinting sharply. I cut it in half the day he returned it, she explained, watching Ethan's eyes take in the symbol. I couldn't bear to sell it. It felt like erasing what happened, but I couldn't wear it whole either. So I severed it, like he severed our future. Ethan studied it thoughtfully. And you've carried the reminder all this time. Yes, she admitted. At first to remember the pain, to guard against trusting too easily again. Then as a symbol of my independence, that I could make my own way without him or anyone. She closed her fingers around the broken circle. But now I wonder if I still need it. If perhaps it's time to let the past be truly past. Ethan's eyes met hers, understanding the significance of what she was saying. What would you do with it? Willa considered for a moment. I think I'd like to use the gold to make something new. Not to erase what happened, but to transform it into something meaningful. A small smile touched her lips. Perhaps a small bell for our future schoolhouse. The word "our" hung in the air between them, charged with promise. Ethan's smile spread slowly across his face. I think that would be fitting, turning something broken into something that calls children to learn. Willa nodded, feeling a weight lifting as she tucked the half ring back beneath her collar, no longer a burden of the past, but raw material for a future yet to be shaped. There would be challenges ahead, certainly. The daily ride to town, adapting to ranch life, building the new school Ethan envisioned. James Blackwood's trial would likely require her testimony eventually, forcing her to confront painful memories. Yet none of these obstacles seemed insurmountable now. She had survived a stagecoach attack, a bullet wound, 3 days in the desert. She had faced down Jake Harker in her own defense. With Ethan beside her, Isabel's motherly wisdom supporting her, and her own newfound strength, Willa felt equal to whatever might come. Penny for your thoughts? Ethan asked, breaking into her reverie. Willa smiled, turning to meet his questioning gaze. I was just thinking how different this is from what I expected when I first headed west. How life takes such unexpected turns. Regrets? He asked, a hint of vulnerability in the question. Not one, she assured him firmly. The path was harder than I anticipated, but it led me here. To Silver Creek, to teaching, To Westfield Ranch. She paused, gathering courage for what she wanted to say next. To you. The simple admission hung between them, freighted with meaning. Ethan reined his horse to a stop, Willa following suit. For a long moment he simply looked at her, his blue eyes intense with emotion. Willa, he began, then seemed to run out of words. Instead, he swung down from his saddle and moved to help her dismount. As her feet touched the ground, his hands remained at her waist, holding her secure. Slowly giving her every chance to pull away, he drew her closer. Willa went willingly, her heart pounding against her ribs in a rhythm that had nothing to do with fear. When his lips met hers, the contact was gentle, questioning, a first exploration rather than a claiming. Willa responded with equal tenderness, her hands rising to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingertips. The kiss deepened gradually, transforming from tentative to certain. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he confessed quietly. "I've been hoping you would," Willa admitted, a smile curving her lips. He laughed softly, the sound warming her more than the afternoon sun. "If I'd known that, I might have been bolder sooner." They remounted after a moment, continuing their journey with lighter hearts and occasional glances that spoke volumes. The ranch came into view just as the sun began to set, its buildings outlined against the crimson sky like a welcoming beacon. Isabel was waiting on the porch, her keen eyes missing nothing as they approached. A knowing smile spread across her weathered face at whatever she saw in their expressions. "So," she said as they dismounted, "the first day was good, yes?" "Very good," Willa confirmed, accepting the housekeeper's embrace. "For many reasons, I think," Isabel observed slyly, glancing between them. "Come, I have prepared a special dinner to celebrate." As they followed her inside, Ethan's hand found Willa's, their fingers intertwining naturally. The simple connection felt right, like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. The future stretched before them, not without challenges, but rich with promise. Together they would build something lasting on this harsh yet beautiful land. A school, a community, a life shared. The desert, which had almost claimed Willa's life, had instead given her a new beginning, one she embraced with open arms and an open heart. Over the next year, Willa continued teaching at Silver Creek, while Ethan began the transformation of the old mission ruins. Local ranchers, grateful for the prospect of education for their children closer to home, contributed labor and materials. Miguel revealed unexpected skill as a carpenter, crafting sturdy desks and benches. Isabel collected books from every source imaginable, writing to Willa's former colleagues in Boston who sent crates of donated volumes. By the following summer, walls stood where only foundations had been, and a roof sheltered what would become the classroom. Ethan added his own touch, large windows to capture the desert light and a small bell tower modeled after the one at Silver Creek. When Willa walked through the nearly completed building, running her fingers along the freshly plastered walls, she could already envision the children who would fill it with life and learning. "What do you think?" Ethan asked, watching her expression carefully as she took it all in. "It's perfect," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Better than I ever imagined." He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Westfield School," he said, testing the name. "Or should we call it Harper Academy?" Willa laughed, leaning into his embrace. "How about simply Desert Bloom School? Because that's what this is, something beautiful flowering in an unexpected place." The name stuck, and when the school opened that fall with 15 eager students from surrounding ranches, its hand-painted sign proudly proclaimed Desert Bloom School to all who traveled the newly marked road to Westfield Ranch.